Environmental cleanup of the area around a controlled burn on South High Street in Bloomington last week could cost the city more than $100,000. Pat Bean reports on the continued fallout from the fire, which rained lead-tainted paint flakes and ash on the surrounding neighborhoods.
1 week ago, residents in the neighborhood off South High Street gathered on the sidewalk to watch the Bloomington Fire Department burn down a house for practice. That was supposed to be the extent of it, but as flames engulfed the house, the residents began noticing a toxic smell and burning in their throats.
Thought it was kind of fun and interesting, and then quickly got a whiff of the paint burning once the fire dropped down into the main body of the house, and sadly recognized the smell because I've been a contractor for decades.
That smell was lead paint burning, and it has been banned for consumer use since 1978, and the smell wasn't all.
Immediately after the fire and during the fire, there was sort of a snowfall of paint chips.
Murphy ran to a paint store and purchased some lead paint test kits. Every sample he tested was positive for lead. Had it not been for Murphy and other concerned residents in the South Maxwell neighborhood, the issue might have flamed out, but Murphy gathered paint flakes from nearly 40 residences and took them to Gabe Filippelli for testing. He's a professor at WTIU and executive director of the Environmental Resilience Institute.
I thought it was an overreaction before I did any of the analyses, and then I did the analyses, and it was very clearly not an overreaction.
Filippelli's lab test and those done by the city confirmed high amounts of lead in the paint flakes.
The average was about 4% lead, and the median value was 2.5% lead. So these are extremely high lead values.
The lab is distributing 500 test kits in the area that will allow residents to collect soil samples and worms from their yards for testing. Why the city didn't expect there to be lead fallout from the burning of a house built in 1951 is not clear. While the mayor's office declined an interview for this story, it pointed to the fact that the city submitted burn plans to the Indiana Department of Environmental Management for approval and received it. The city was required to remove carpeting, asphalt shingles, vinyl siding, and other materials prior to the burn by IDM.
I saw the approval documents, and the approval documents don't indicate anything about lead paint. But this is an enormous oversight. And I think that this permitting process needs to be amended immediately.
Rollo represents the affected area. He says he's contacting state officials to create legislation that will make lead paint a consideration in IDM's approval process.
I can't believe that this was simply not considered.
Once it knew of the problem, the city reached an agreement with ServPro on Saturday to clean up the affected area. But that deal fell through after little work was done, and it wasn't until Tuesday afternoon that another company, Environmental Assurance Company Incorporated of Indianapolis, began vacuuming up paint flakes from the area. The city also contracted with VET Environmental Engineering of Bloomington to monitor the air quality during the process.
Honestly, we're not sure how long it's going to take. We're going to take as long as it needs to do it right.
According to information provided by the city, both contracts have cost restraints built in. Together, the bill from those two companies should not exceed around $118,000, but the city expects the final cost could be lower. That money will come out of the fire department's budget.
That's secondary to the matter at hand, which is putting things right.
More than 150 residents have filed remediation forms with the city, and around 100 homes have been evaluated so far by EACI and VET. Paint flakes have been found as far west as Bryan Park, which is more than a mile away from the burn site. Murphy has created a map showing the affected areas and breaking them down into zones based on proximity to the burn site and number of flakes found. The city released its own map Wednesday night showing zones of remediation. Along with releasing toxic particles into a core neighborhood, residents took issue with the city burning a large structure inside city limits.
We can't even burn our yard waste. I mean, let alone how can a house that's so old be able to be burned in such a dense populated area of Bloomington? I understand it was for training, firefighter training, but it's affected everything.
Rollo also took note of the ordinance that prohibits burning of any kind inside the city limits.
It's a deep irony that this has occurred. I don't know what to say except that, it shouldn't occur in the future.
For Indiana News Desk, I'm Pat Bean.
We're joined now by Marta Vaniera, an environmental chemist and an assistant professor at IU's O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs. Welcome, Professor. Thanks so much for being here. So, we just heard about these high concentration of lead flakes from the burn. So what kind of dangers do they pose to the community?
So as we have heard, the levels that were measured in these paint chips that are spread across a large area in Bloomington are pretty high. And unfortunately, lead is very toxic. There's no safe levels of lead, meaning anything above 0 is considered toxic.
So it rained yesterday. Does that help anything?
So it helped and it doesn't, in the sense that the rain brought all the particles, all the lead that could have been on the leaves down onto the soil, and it might have broken down some of those paint chips, but then it transformed into a different problem. Lead may now be in the soil.
So the city has contracted to have those paint flakes vacuumed up, but what should residents in those areas do if they come across them?
So don't touch them unless you're wearing gloves. So I would honestly leave them be. And what they can do is leave their shoes out and have doormats and leave everything from the outside out and not bring it inside. And don't let the kids play with the leaves that we all have sitting in our backyards.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about those flakes that are everywhere, but what about the air right now in that area? Is that safe?
I think the air is okay. It's in the particles, and the rain has washed them down. So I think rain was a good thing from that respect.
Now, what about if people have any type of vegetable gardens in their backyard right now? Can they still use them, or are they contaminated?
I wouldn't eat them. I think there's a good chance that they have been contaminated, and you don't want to take any chance when lead is involved, especially for younger kids.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Thank you.
Now, the city has set up a website with information about the burn, safety procedures, and how to request remediation. It's at bloomington.in.gov/BFD burn info.